Hello, my dear masterminds. They noticed it before you said a word, before you changed routines, before you made any visible move. Something about you shifted overnight. And the people who rely on patterns felt it immediately, not emotionally, structurally. Conversations started breaking rhythm around you. Familiar dynamics stopped landing the way they used to. The usual cues they depended on to read you returned nothing. How the usual processes stopped working. And when predictability disappears, attention sharpens fast. They replayed recent interactions, searching for the moment they missed. A sentence, a reaction, a tell. There wasn't one. That's what unsettled them. You didn't escalate. You didn't announce growth. You didn't perform a transformation. You stayed the same on the surface, and yet the field around you reorganized. That's the kind of shift people can't ignore because it doesn't come with explanation. It comes with consequence. The ones who are sensitive to influence felt it first. Their usual influence stopped having effect. Their timing fell off. Their assumptions expired without warning. They tried normal adjustments, more pressure, more friendliness, more distance. Nothing recalibrated the situation, because what changed wasn't your behavior, it was your position. And when someone's position shifts without visible cause, the only response left is investigation. That's when they stopped asking you questions and started asking each other. Something changed. They all felt it, but no one could agree on how it happened. What unsettled them wasn't the shift itself. It was how clean it was. No buildup, no visible struggle, no narrative they could track. Most people telegraph change long before it arrives. They signal dissatisfaction. They leak ambition. They rehearse growth out loud. You didn't. You moved without resistance or display, and friction is what systems depend on to measure influence. Overnight, reactions that once produced results stopped landing. Words that used to steer you passed straight through. Expectations that once created pressure now dissolved on contact. That's when uncertainty spread. Because when someone stops responding to familiar inputs, it forces a question no one wants to ask. Did we misjudge them from the start? They tested gently at first. Small provocations, casual assumptions, old dynamics replayed to see if you'd step back into position. You didn't. Not defiantly, not emotionally. You simply didn't return to the role they remembered. And roles only exist as long as someone keeps playing them. That's when concern replaced curiosity. They realized this wasn't a mood or a phase. It wasn't confidence or detachment. It was alignment. Your timing no longer synced to theirs. Your decisions didn't seek permission from the room. You weren't reacting slower or faster. You were responding from somewhere else entirely. And when people can't locate the source of change, they don't confront it. They study it. That's when the questions stopped being personal and started becoming technical. What shifted? When? Why now? And why without warning? That's when outside language entered the conversation. Not because they believed experts had answers, but because admitting uncertainty required distance. They needed frameworks that didn't involve personal miscalculation. So they asked analysts, coaches, strategists, people whose job is to explain shifts without assigning blame. They described you in neutral terms, observable changes, behavioral data, energy in the room. They wanted a clear explanation that preserved their original assumptions. What they got instead were pauses, follow-up questions, silence where conclusions were expected. Because what you did doesn't register as development. Development has trajectory, effort, visible markers. What you did registers as consolidation, like something snapped into place and stopped negotiating. Experts listen for tells. Emotional compensation, overcorrection. You showed none. Your calm wasn't restraint. It was absence of friction. Your silence wasn't withdrawal. It was completion. And completion doesn't explain itself. That's why the answers they received felt unusually serious. High functioning, internally stable, self-referenced. Phrases that sound clinical but carry weight, because people don't escalate consultation when they feel safe. They do it when something no longer reacts to familiar cues. Overnight, you became unresponsive to the usual methods, not resistant, no longer accessible in the same way. And that state led to a single realization no one wanted to voice out loud. This person no longer needs our input to maintain position. And once that idea enters the room, the balance doesn't tilt. It resets. What finally unsettled them wasn't what the experts said. It was what none of them could say. No one could point to a trigger. No conflict. No loss. No breakthrough moment that justified the shift. Which meant the change didn't come from reaction. It came from decision. And decisions made without pressure are the most difficult to respond to. They started replaying history differently. Moments they once dismissed now carried weight. Times you didn't argue when you should have. Times you didn't defend yourself when it would have been easy. Times you let situations resolve without inserting control. Those moments weren't passivity. They were positioning. You weren't disengaged. You were conserving momentum by not spending it. And when that positioning finally settled, it didn't announce itself. It narrowed possibilities. Suddenly, people felt the cost of misjudgment. They realized they had been operating under the assumption that time worked in their favor, that if something shifted, they would see it coming. But what they missed was simple. You weren't evolving in public. You were stabilizing in private. And stabilization doesn't broadcast. It completes. That's why the shift felt overnight. Not because it was sudden, because it was finished. After that, something subtle but final happened. They stopped asking you directly, not out of respect, out of recognition. Questions assume availability. Curiosity assumes relevance. And they sensed, without anyone saying it out loud, that neither applied anymore. You weren't hiding information. You simply weren't positioned to be questioned. Your presence stopped inviting explanation. When people feel that shift, they don't push harder. They reroute. That's why the conversations about you stayed elsewhere. That's why experts were consulted instead of you, because approaching you would have required acknowledging something difficult. That whatever changed wasn't something you gained, it was something you stopped offering. Reaction, availability, emotional entry points. You didn't become guarded. You became self-contained. And self-containment removes negotiation entirely. That's the part they're still adjusting to. Not the mystery of what changed, but the lasting nature of it. Overnight, you exited the pattern they were used to operating inside. No more calibration, no more testing, no more influence disguised as concern. They can analyze it, label it, study it from a distance, but they already know the truth underneath all the language. Whatever shifted in you didn't need validation. It didn't ask to be understood. And it isn't shifting back. That's why they're still asking experts. Because the one person who could explain it doesn't need to. And this is where it settles. Without drama and without return, the questions don't stop because they get answered. They stop because the answer becomes unnecessary. People adjust faster than they admit. Once they sense that something no longer responds to pressure, they stop applying it. Once they feel that explanations aren't available, they stop asking. You didn't intimidate anyone. You didn't claim superiority. You didn't assert a higher position. You simply stopped orienting yourself around external signals, and that single change reorganized everything around you. Overnight wasn't the moment you transformed. Overnight was the moment they noticed the transformation was already complete. That's why the shift felt abrupt. Not because it began then, but because it finished before anyone was watching closely enough. Now they operate differently around you. More carefully, more precisely. Not because you demand it, but because accuracy calls for it. You've become a stable reference in how they orient themselves, not a variable to test, not a reaction to provoke, a constant to account for. And constants don't need explanation. They don't announce themselves. They don't negotiate. They simply exist. And everything else adjusts. That's the final state they're learning to live with. Your energy didn't shift to be seen. It shifted to settle. And once something settles at that level, the room doesn't debate it. It reorganizes around it quietly, over time. What they never say out loud is that this didn't make you louder, sharper, or more visible. It made you impossible to overlook in a different way. Not because you take space, but because you no longer adjust to it. The experts can analyze patterns. The observers can trade theories. But everyone feels the same thing underneath it all. The shift didn't create mystery. It closed access. And when access closes without confrontation, without explanation, without collapse, the environment adapts instinctively. That's why nothing escalated. That's why no one challenged it directly. The room learned faster than language could keep up. Your energy didn't announce power. It removed reliance. And once reliance is gone, questions lose urgency. Influence loses momentum. Curiosity no longer carried momentum. What remained was alignment with reality as it is, not as they expected it to be. That's why this doesn't fade. That's why it doesn't shift back. And that's why they kept asking experts instead of you. Because the change didn't introduce something new. It clarified what was already complete. What lingers after everything settles isn't confusion, it's recalibration. People move differently now, even when they don't consciously connect it to you. They pause longer before making assumptions. They hesitate before applying pressure the way they used to. Not because they're afraid, but because experience reshaped their expectations. They learned that not every shift announces itself. Not every change looks like effort. Some transitions finish quietly, and by the time they're noticed, they can't be undone. You became the reference point for that realization, not as a lesson you taught, but as a state they came to recognize. And states don't argue. They persist. That's why your name comes up less directly, but carries more significance when it does. People don't speculate loudly anymore. They speak carefully. They've learned that certainty dissolves quickly around something that doesn't seek validation. Your energy didn't create distance. It created clarity. And clarity casts a long shadow, long after the experts stop talking, long after theories lose relevance. The adjustment remains. They don't need to understand what changed anymore. They just know how to behave now. And that understanding holds, because it wasn't intellectual, it was structural. This is the point where it becomes ordinary to them. Not familiar, ordinary. The same way a constant no longer needs explanation once it's accepted. They no longer frame your shift as an event. It's a condition now, something accounted for without discussion. People don't check for changes anymore. They don't wait for you to revert. They don't expect an explanation later. They've already adjusted their expectations to match what's real. You're no longer treated as a situation to manage, a presence to decode, or a variable to influence. You're treated as a fixed factor, and fixed factors don't generate noise. They shape behavior quietly. That's why urgency disappeared. That's why the questions moved away from you and never returned. Your energy didn't demand acknowledgement. It defined limits without announcement. And limits that don't require enforcement last the longest. This is the final state. Not admiration, not fear, accuracy. The kind that doesn't announce itself and doesn't need reinforcement. They notice the shift overnight because that's when it finished registering. But what changed was already settled. And once something settles at that level, it doesn't move again. What follows after accuracy sets in is something most people never notice until they're inside it. The environment stops testing you. Not gradually, entirely. No more indirect pushes. No more subtle attempts to see if you'll bend. No more recalibration efforts to recover old influence. Those behaviors rely on uncertainty, and uncertainty no longer surrounds you. People sense, beneath thought, that effort aimed at moving you will return without result. Not resisted, not reflected, simply ineffective. And ineffectiveness discourages repetition faster than conflict ever could. That's why the dynamic doesn't oscillate. It doesn't flare up and settle again. It locks. You didn't train anyone. You didn't correct behavior. You didn't set terms. You stepped away from the processes that make negotiation possible. The outcome of that isn't dominance. It's completion. The kind that doesn't need defense because nothing is pushing against it anymore. This is why the shift feels lasting. Because it is. Not emotionally, structurally. You're no longer someone people try to understand in order to position themselves. You're someone they position themselves around without comment. And once that happens, there's nothing left to continue. The story ends not with resolution, but with adjustment. And adjustment, once made, doesn't ask to be undone. What they never regain after this is the belief that access was guaranteed, that watching long enough would eventually grant understanding, that patience alone unlocks influence. That belief fades quietly, and it doesn't return, because they learn something irreversible through you. Some people don't become clearer with time. They move beyond interpretation. Not because they hide, but because there's nothing left to negotiate with. You didn't move into distance. You moved into completion. And completion doesn't invite follow-ups. It closes the exchange entirely. From here on, no one waits for your next phase. No one expects an explanation later. No one assumes the shift was temporary. They already adjusted their internal map. You are accounted for, not anticipated. That's the deepest consequence of all. You didn't create curiosity that fades. You created certainty that settles. And settled certainty doesn't look dramatic. It looks like silence, where probing used to be. It looks like restraint where pressure once lived. It looks like people moving around a truth they no longer need to discuss. Your energy didn't shift to announce power. It shifted to remove dependence. And once dependence is gone, nothing pulls you back. That's why this doesn't evolve further. That's why it doesn't escalate. That's why it doesn't need another chapter. Overnight wasn't the beginning. Overnight was simply the moment they realized the change had already taken hold. No echo. No need for reinforcement. People don't revisit their theories because revisiting would imply uncertainty, and uncertainty no longer has a place here. What remains is a settled understanding that doesn't require language. They know where not to apply pressure. They know which assumptions no longer function. They know that whatever shifted in you isn't accessible through effort, patience, or proximity. And knowledge like that doesn't create drama. It creates restraint. You didn't win anything. You didn't prove anything. You didn't replace one dynamic with another. You removed the dynamic altogether. The experts move on. The observers redirect their attention. The environment has already adjusted. You are no longer processed as a question. You are treated as a condition. And conditions don't reopen once accepted. That's the end state. Quiet, stable, settled. Your energy didn't change to be understood. It changed to stop being interpreted. The last thing they accept, without ever saying it, is that this wasn't something they missed briefly. It was something they were never positioned to track in the first place. Whatever shifted in you didn't emerge from reaction, pressure, or circumstance. It completed on its own timeline, outside their awareness. That's why no explanation ever felt sufficient. That's why no expert answer ever satisfied them. They weren't late to understanding. Understanding was never the route. You didn't outgrow their expectations. You stepped beyond the process that creates expectations at all. And once that's recognized, everything stops cleanly. No more watching. No more interpreting. No more waiting for another version of you to appear. They already know there won't be one. This isn't distance. This isn't mystery. This is completion. You are no longer read. You are accounted for. And nothing follows that state. The shift didn't make you louder. It made you finished. Hello, my dear masterminds. They brought noise like armor, laughs, threats, theatrics. You brought nothing but breath. The room expected thunder. You answered with a still sky. And that, right there, is where their spine creaked. Because rage is predictable, panic is readable, but calm is a mirror. It shows them what they pretend not to be. Your silence didn't retreat, it advanced. And their confidence tripped over it like wire in the dark. They wanted a spectacle. You gave them a pause. In that pause, old tricks died. Their alphas scanned for weakness and found a horizon. Steady, endless, uncrowded by fear. Calm isn't empty, it's weighted. It presses on throats that rely on volume. The loudest realized something sickening. Your oxygen wasn't theirs to cut. You were breathing on your own terms, and their script had no lines for that. They test reactions the way pickpockets test pockets. Tap, tug, watch the flinch. You didn't flinch. Their hands came back empty, and emptiness terrifies thieves. Because if they can't pull panic from you, they can't own the room. Your stillness turned their fishing line into a stranglehold around their own ego. The more they yanked, the tighter it cinched. Calm, tightened properly, is a hold they put on themselves. In interrogation, the trick is time. They stretch minutes until nerves snap. Yours didn't. You watched the clock like a tide watches sand. Inevitably, the bulb hummed. The table waited. The questions rehearsed themselves into dust. When they ran out of angles, they met the one angle that doesn't blink. Your gaze leveled, patient, uninterested in proving anything. Proof. That night wore your pulse. Boardroom hyenas tried the smirk routine. Lean back, laugh light, cut deep. You sipped water like it was a verdict. The laugh failed halfway out. Calm moved through the table legs, climbed spines, loosened grips on pens. Dominance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lowers the room temperature until excuses shiver and drop to the floor. They thought influence was noise, then influence arrived as climate. A street, Alpha squared his shoulders. Crowd circling for show. You nodded once, permission withdrawn. The air shifted. His jaw clenched at nothing but gravity. Calm stole the audience he needed. Without witnesses, performance is just twitching. He felt it. The ring shrinking, his script evaporating. Your silence counting down a clock he didn't see. He stepped back like it was strategy. Everyone heard the surrender. They mistook calm for softness. Then they touched it and felt steel under velvet. Your stillness isn't delay, it's decision. You don't freeze, you measure. You don't stall. You select the exact second where one sentence will do the work of 50 punches. They were ready for chaos. They weren't ready for precision. Precision is the force they never trained to survive. Monitors once tracked your tells. Micro movements, breath spikes, eye flickers. The graph stayed flat like a heart beyond fear. Their analyst blamed the machine. The machine blamed the analyst. Calm turned their data into fiction. And when data dissolves, hierarchy follows. The ones who relied on charts felt naked because there's no statistic for a person who refuses to be measured. They escalated. Voices lifted. Shoulders crowded the table. You slid your chair back an inch and gave them the distance they feared most. Boundaries are loud in silence, said. I'm not in your storm. Your storm is in front of me. Storms are loud until they meet a mountain. Then all that rage folds into rain. They felt small as hail on stone. Brief noise. No dent. A negotiator tried tempo traps. Quick questions, false endings, baited pauses. You rewarded none. Silence remained sovereign. The trickster learned a rule every veteran hides. The first one to need the moment loses it. You didn't need it. You owned it. He heard his own voice begging for exit cues. Calm pushed him to confess what pressure never could. He wanted out more than he wanted win. In the gym, they paced to intimidate. In meeting rooms, they paced to escape. Your stillness exposed which one they were. Feet that pretend to hunt often run. Calm is motion's judge. It sorts wolves from tourists. When you don't move, distance does. It expands between you and those who never really had reach. They felt farther from you, sentence by sentence, until authority turned into echo. They threw rumors to scratch your armor. You didn't chase them. Lies starve when the hunted won't run. Your silence made gossip eat itself, circle by circle, shrinking until even the loud mouths bit their tongues. A truth about calm. It doesn't argue. It makes the other side repeat themselves until they hear what they sound like. That sound is the end of their campaign. They brought a closer, a smile sharpened into blade. He studied posture, breath, pupils. Yours read like winter, clear, crisp, no panic tracks. He pivoted to charm. Charm drowned in that air. Calm is a solvent. It dissolves performance to mineral content. He left with fewer tricks than he arrived, pockets light, mask heavier, voice finally honest. I can't move this. They think explosions end rooms. Calm ends rooms faster. A single quiet, no rearranges furniture in men's heads. You said little, and the blueprints folded. Plans that depended on your reaction felt homeless. Wandering halls for a door that wasn't built. Calm doesn't slam doors. It never built them. They learned the difference between access and permission the hard way. Threats came wrapped in courtesy. With respect, you should. You let them finish the rope. Calm hands it back tied in a bow. You replied with a sentence short as a blade. No. The room blinked like lights in a surge. When boundaries are that plain, leverage dies. They had prepared for debate, not a verdict. Court adjourned without gavel, just gravity. They played crowd math, stack numbers, stack noise, trap you in theater. You did arithmetic of one. Calm makes a majority look rented. 1,000 borrowed voices sound thinner than one owned breath. When you didn't contest the chorus heard itself, out of tune, off key, off purpose. They stopped singing. You didn't need to start. They waited for anger to justify force. It didn't arrive. Calm robbed them of reasonable. Without your rage, their escalation looked like panic in uniform. Authority hates mirrors. Calm is mercury, coded truth. It showed them they weren't enforcing order. They were begging chaos to validate them. Chaos never showed. The badge looked lighter. An enemy rehearsed insults like arrows. You gave him range and watched powder turn to dust mid-air. Not because words are harmless, but because calm strips charge from language, not anchored to reality. He kept firing blanks until his pride limped home. Meanwhile, your quiet didn't move. It doesn't need to. Gravity is exempt from sprinting. Heartbeat tricks, the ones they used to spot fear, failed. Calm slowed yours until the monitor sounded like a metronome training, silence to sing. The tech's hand hovered, waiting for a spike that never came. That waiting broke him. People can endure screams. They collapse under steadiness. They can't shake. Your pulse wrote the policy. We don't rush here. They assembled a moment to corner you. Lights, eyes, question shaped like trap. You let the moment pass unharvested. Moments crave attention. Starving them is force of a higher class. The trap sprung on emptiness and snapped its own teeth. Calm watched, then set the broken snare down gently. Mercy from an edge they still don't understand. They called you cold. Cold is weather. Calm is engineering. It builds rooms where panic has no oxygen. In that architecture, even seasoned predators forget their lines. They came to devour. They learned to breathe. Your stillness taught them physics. Energy wasted on noise cannot bend reality. Energy conserved can. You conserve. Reality bends. The clever one tried humor, thinking laughter could trespass where pressure failed. Your half smile said nice try, then said nothing else. His joke died a noble end, unattended. Calm holds funerals for tactics. It lets them pass with dignity, but it doesn't resuscitate them. He left with applause from no one, having learned the oldest rule: attention is rented, presence is owned. A strategist whispered, "Provoke him." They did. You didn't tip. The whisper became appease him. They tried. You still didn't tip. That's when command realized the truth. Their levers don't attach to anything inside you. Calm is leverless. No hinges, no handles, no hidden strings. When they can't pull, they can't rule. And rulers without pull become audience. You set your glass down once. Soft, intentional. It sounded like a verdict wrapped in etiquette. Calm uses small gestures as artillery. A nod rearranges ranks. A breath schedules endings. A glance rescripts meetings. They chased the meaning and missed the message. Power that doesn't need volume is already installed. Updates arrive in silence. They asked, "What do you want?" Expecting negotiation. Calm answered with a boundary, not a bargain. This line holds. Lines like that don't shout. They endure. They weather tantrums like cliffs weather waves, erosion on the loud side, patience on the high ground. Eventually, even storms memorize the coastline and adjust. They adjusted. A rival plotted. Stage accidents. Public pokes to harvest your anger. You declined the stage. His performance played to empty seats. Audiences don't follow noise. They follow gravity. You were gravity. He learned fame without a counterweight feels like falling. Calm isn't camera shy. It's camera proof. Lenses love chaos. They bow to control. They invoked history. People like you always break. Calm smiled like a locksmith. Locks don't argue with keys, they click. Their narrative clicked open and spilled parts on the floor. Projections, fears, traditions that never met someone who doesn't run. You didn't break their history. You outlived it. Endurance is the loudest revision. Threat meter maxed. You exhaled. The needle fell like a curtain. Calm is anti-theater. It closes shows that should have never sold tickets. They stared at the empty stage and realized the star had been their own adrenaline. You weren't there to play villain or hero. You were there to end auditions. Contracts tore themselves. They tried silence back. Awkward mimicry. Arms folded, lips thin, but counterfeit calm leaks through the eyes. Yours held horizon, theirs held hurry. Real calm isn't paused panic, it's confident oxygen. The copycat routine cracked first at the knuckles, then at the voice, then at the knees. Imitation is heavy when the original is weightless. A mentor once told you, choose when to speak so your words never compete with your breath. You did. One statement. placed like a cornerstone, carried the room's roof. Everyone felt architecture arrive. Calm as construction. It leaves beams where others leave noises. By the time they looked up, the ceiling already had your signature. They leaned on delay tactics. We'll reconvene. Let's revisit. Bureaucratic fog. Calm is a lighthouse. Fog performs for it, not against it. You waited without shrinking. Waiting isn't idle in your hands, it's harvest. Procrastination rotted their leverage from the inside, until the only thing left to revisit was their excuse. A hitter with a temper lunged verbally, then stepped forward 2 inches, the test step. You didn't blink. Physics handled the rest. Force needs invitation, none given. He stopped himself to save face, then called it mercy. Calm, let him keep the story. Mercy is the luxury of the undefeated. You afforded it without receipt. They asked for feedback, hoping to bait critique into conflict. You offered clarity instead. Clarity is conflict's eviction notice. It shines on corners where arguments breed and tells them to pack. The meeting ended, not with applause, but with absence. No fight to replay, no drama to feed on. Starved beasts go quiet. So did they. The room tried chaos math. More people, more angles, more agendas. Calm reduced it to first principles. What's true? What's required? What's mine? Complexity hates subtraction. It sputtered, shrank, and fit inside 3 sentences. People call that dominance. It's just discipline with better posture. A last-ditch alpha whispered, "Push harder." Harder cracked him. Because strength built on tension can't survive endurance. You didn't outmuscle him, you outlasted him. Calm is endurance's tuxedo. It does marathons like their meetings. When he finally sat, he called it strategy. We called it collapse. Cameras arrived to trap you in commentaries. You gave them frame-proof presence. Clips love rage because rage edits well. Calm ruins editors. It leaves no handle to twist, no freeze frame to weaponize. They packed up with footage that looked like wisdom and hated how little scandal it bought. Headlines starved. Your legend ate. They wondered who trained you, as if calm is a trick. It's a treaty you signed with yourself. Nothing external decides your pulse. Once you ink that, rooms negotiate with you, not the other way around. They can leave or adapt. Most adapt. Those who leave send postcards later that read, "You were right. Noise was a tax." A snake tried flattery. Sugar around poison. Calm tasted the metal and set the cup down. Flattery dies when appetite declines. You weren't thirsty for approval, so the sugar couldn't stick. The poison turned on the tongue that carried it. He smiled too long and tripped on his own words. Silence filed the incident as self-inflicted. They prayed for a glitch. One bad day to prove you ordinary. Bad days arrived and found no purchase. Calm doesn't deny weather. It respects it and keeps the foundation dry. Floods came and left embarrassed. Wind came and left educated. Storms moved on to softer towns. Your address became a rumor they don't test twice. Eventually they stopped trying to break you and started trying to borrow you. Calm doesn't rent itself out. It changes zoning laws. Teach us, they asked. You taught by doing nothing, performative. You demonstrated boundaries, breathing, brevity. Some learned, some left. All adjusted their tone when saying your name. And that's what really breaks them. Not your victories, but your velocity toward none of their bait. You don't chase rabbits through bramble. You plant orchards and wait for hunger to learn directions. Calm feeds who can cook. The rest keep gnawing on old bones of drama, wondering why their teeth hurt. Rumor now describes you as dangerously quiet. The danger isn't quiet, it's competence. Quiet is just how competence keeps its receipts clean. You move like a ledger that never forgets. Credits paid, debts called when timing serves the lesson. They tried to audit you. The books balance themselves. In the end, no statue stands for loudness. Statues stand for stillness that survived centuries of weather. You are that stillness in motion, oxymoron to them, operating manual to us. They bring forecasts. You bring climate. Forecasts apologize eventually. Climate does not. So when they ask what breaks them, tell them the truth gently. It's not your rage. It's your refusal to donate adrenaline to their circus. You stop paying the ticket price. You walk the perimeter and own the tent. The ringmaster bows because the lights answer to your switch, not his whip. And when they ask what they fear, let the silence answer. It will say, this one cannot be rushed, baited, or borrowed. This one carries weather inside and lends sunshine by choice. We bent our voices and got no purchase. We staged our storms and found a harbor. We tried to rule the room. The room already listened to him. They will call it mystery because admitting discipline hurts. Mystery sells better than practice. You smile, not to taunt, but because you know the cost of this peace. Boundaries kept, breath trained, words rationed like gold. They could buy the same treasure. They won't. That gap is the shadow they taste when you arrive, the difference between those who wish and those who build. Make no mistake, calm isn't passive. It's a blade that refuses rust. It marks only what touches it, and everything that touches it learns order. Chaos leaves fingerprints. Calm leaves blueprints. After you pass, rooms rebuild themselves with fewer exits for panic. That's your legacy, not aftermath, but architecture. And architecture doesn't fade, it stays, shaping everything that enters. If they ever force a confrontation, your answer is the same. Breathe, decide, conclude. No tremor, no theater, just endings written clean. Rivals hate tidy conclusions. They can't edit them into spectacle. They'll call you ruthless. You'll call it complete. And completion is older than their noise, sharper than their schemes, truer than their applause. Completion is the crown they can't steal. So keep the treaty. No outside storm sets your tide. Keep the posture, head level, jaw loose, eyes steady. Keep the clock. Speak only when the hour pays interest. And watch how the world adjusts around you, reluctantly at first, then gratefully. Leadership isn't noise. Leadership is calm that stayed long enough to become law. And law doesn't ask. It anchors. They built towers on adrenaline. You built yours on breath. Towers of adrenaline sway, shout, and beg the wind for mercy. Towers of breath hum like lighthouses and make the wind read maps. That's why they fear you. Not because you're loud, but because you don't need to be. Your calm breaks their rhythm. Your calm crowns you, and crowns given by silence can't be removed.